I was walking back from the Manchester Central Library that Tuesday afternoon. My backpack heavy with textbooks I probably wouldn't read until the last minute. The sky looked angry, all gray and purple, like it was about to dump rain on the whole city. I decided to cut through the alley behind Piccadilly Station to avoid the crowds on the main road. That's when I heard it. 3 sharp cracks that made my stomach drop. Gunshots. I'd never heard them in person before, but there was no mistaking that sound. People started screaming somewhere ahead of me, their voices echoing off the brick walls. Every reasonable part of my brain told me to turn around and run the other way, call the police from a safe distance, mind my own business. But my feet kept moving forward, like they had a mind of their own. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe it was stupidity, but something pulled me toward the chaos. I found him behind a rusted dumpster, crumpled against the wall like a broken doll. His white shirt was turning red fast, the blood spreading from somewhere around his ribs. He was conscious but barely, his eyes unfocused and his breathing shallow. A middle-aged man, maybe 50, wearing expensive clothes that were now ruined. "Hey, can you hear me?" I dropped my bag and knelt beside him, my hands shaking. Blood was everywhere. So much blood. I'd never seen anything like it outside of movies. He tried to say something but only managed a weak groan. I pulled off my university scarf, the blue one my dad had bought me, and pressed it against the wound. The fabric turned warm and sticky immediately. I fumbled for my phone with my free hand, nearly dropping it twice before managing to dial 999. "Emergency services. What's your emergency?" "Someone's been shot," I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "He's bleeding really badly. We're in the alley behind Piccadilly Station near the old newsstand. Ambulance and police are on their way. Stay on the line with me." The man's eyes found mine then, and he squeezed my wrist with what little strength he had left. "Thank you," he whispered, so quietly I almost missed it. "Don't talk. Just breathe," I told him, though I had no idea if that was the right thing to say. "Help's coming." The paramedics arrived in what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. They took one look at the man and their whole demeanor changed. One of them, a woman with short red hair, gave me a strange look as they worked on him. "Do you know who this is?" she asked while her partner started an IV. I shook my head. "Just found him like this." She didn't say anything else, but I caught her exchanging glances with the other paramedic. They loaded him onto a stretcher and disappeared into the ambulance, leaving me standing there with bloody hands and 1,000 questions. A police officer took my statement, asking the same questions 3 different ways. Had I seen the shooter? Did I know the victim? Why was I in the alley? I answered as best I could, but everything felt surreal, like watching someone else's life through thick glass. By the time they let me go, the rain had started. I walked home slowly, my scarf gone, my hands still shaking. The metallic smell of blood seemed stuck in my nose. I kept replaying those few minutes over and over, wondering if I'd done enough, if I'd done anything right at all. I thought about calling my dad, but he was in Edinburgh on business and wouldn't be back until Friday. Clarice would just make it about herself somehow, so I decided to keep it quiet, at least until I could make sense of what had happened. Looking back, that was probably my first mistake. The front gate was wide open when I got home, which was weird because Clarice was always paranoid about security. She'd installed those motion sensors last month and made a huge fuss about keeping everything locked up tight, but there it was, hanging open like an invitation I didn't want to accept. I could hear her voice before I even reached the door. She was on the phone, pacing around the kitchen the way she did when she was working herself up about something. I tried to slip past and head straight upstairs, but the floorboard by the stairs creaked and gave me away. "Where the hell have you been?" She appeared in the doorway, still holding her phone, her face already twisted with that familiar look of disgust. "I've been calling you for hours. My phone died," I said, which wasn't exactly a lie since I'd used up the battery talking to the police. "I was at the library." "Don't lie to me, Emma. Mrs. Patterson saw you getting into a police car near the station. What kind of trouble have you gotten yourself into now?" I should have known the neighbors would be watching. Mrs. Patterson had nothing better to do than spy on everyone from her front window. I helped someone who was hurt. That's all. Helped someone. Clarice's voice went up an octave. "You helped someone? What about helping your own family?" What about helping me when I needed you to pick up Sophie from school because I was dealing with the bloody mortgage company all afternoon? Sophie, my 12-year-old stepsister. I'd completely forgotten she had early dismissal today. I'm sorry, I didn't realize. Of course you didn't realize. You never realize anything unless it's about you. Clarice stepped closer, and I could smell the wine on her breath. Day drinking again. Do you know what Sophie had to do? She had to call her friend's mum for a ride because her own sister couldn't be bothered to show up. She's not my daughter, Clarice. She's yours. The words came out before I could stop them. I saw her face change. Saw the moment she decided to go nuclear. Right, of course. Because you're not really family, are you? You're just some charity case your father dragged in here. Her voice was getting louder, and I could see curtains twitching in the windows across the street. Well, if you'd rather spend your time playing Florence Nightingale to strangers than taking care of your responsibilities here, maybe you should find somewhere else to do it. What's that supposed to mean? She walked to the stairs and came back down with my overnight bag, the one I used for school trips. She'd stuffed it with clothes. Not neatly, just crammed everything in like she was packing rubbish. It means get out. She tossed the bag at my feet. I'm done pretending you belong here. Your father's not here to protect you this time. I stared at the bag, then at her. You're kicking me out? For helping someone who was bleeding to death? I'm kicking you out for being selfish. For thinking you're better than the rest of us. For forgetting that family comes first. She opened the front door and stood beside it like a bouncer. Go on then. Go save the world. Just don't expect to come crawling back here when you figure out how cold it is out there. Sophie appeared at the top of the stairs in her school uniform, her face red and confused. Mum, what's happening? Why are you shouting? Nothing, sweetheart. Emma's just going to stay with a friend for a while. Clarice's voice turned sickeningly sweet when she spoke to her daughter. Go finish your homework. I picked up my bag and walked toward the door, my legs feeling like they were made of lead. When Dad gets back, your father will understand when I explain how you abandoned your family in our time of need. She stepped closer, lowering her voice so Sophie couldn't hear. And if you think you can run to him and play the victim, think again. He's got enough on his plate without dealing with your drama. The door slammed behind me before I could say another word. I stood there on the doorstep for a moment, listening to the sound of the lock turning. Then I heard Sophie asking questions, and Clarice's muffled voice, making excuses I couldn't quite make out. The rain was coming down harder now, and I didn't have an umbrella. I pulled out my phone to call someone, anyone, but remembered it was dead. Just like everything else in my life, apparently. I walked for hours in the rain, my bag getting heavier with each step. The streets looked different at night, harsher somehow, like the city had put on a meaner face after dark. I tried to think of someone to call, somewhere to go, but came up empty every time. My best friend Sarah lived in student housing with 3 roommates. Her place was barely big enough for the people who were supposed to be there. My dad's sister lived in Cardiff, and we hadn't spoken since Christmas anyway. The few other friends I had were more like acquaintances, really. People I knew from lectures but wouldn't feel comfortable asking for help. I ended up at the 24-hour McDonald's near the university, nursing a cup of tea and trying to make sense of what had just happened. The fluorescent lights made everything look sickly yellow, and the smell of chip oil was making my stomach turn. A group of students came in around midnight, loud and drunk, probably celebrating the end of exams. They looked so young, so carefree. Had I ever been like that? You all right, love? The woman behind the counter was maybe 60, with kind eyes and a Manchester accent thick as treacle. You've been sitting there for 2 hours. Yeah, just waiting for someone, I lied, managing a weak smile. She didn't believe me, I could tell, but she didn't push it either. Just nodded and went back to wiping down tables that were already clean. Around 3 a.m, I gave up pretending and found a bench at the bus station. There were a few other lost souls there, people with their own stories written in the lines of their faces. A man in a torn jacket was talking to himself in the corner. A woman with a baby was trying to get the child to sleep despite the harsh lighting. I pulled my jacket tighter and tried to get comfortable on the plastic bench. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the man from the alley, his blood on my hands, his grateful whisper. Then I heard Clarice's voice, calling me selfish, telling me I didn't belong. Maybe she was right. Maybe I was selfish for helping a stranger when my own family needed me. But Sophie wasn't really my responsibility, was she? And picking her up from school wasn't exactly a life-or-death situation. Not like what had happened in that alley. I thought about the man's face when he thanked me. He'd looked at me like I was someone worth looking at. Someone who mattered. When was the last time anyone in my family had looked at me like that? When was the last time Clarice had said anything to me that wasn't a criticism or complaint? The truth was, I'd been walking on eggshells around her for months, ever since Dad had lost his job and found the new one that required so much travel. She'd been taking her stress out on everyone, but mostly on me. Sophie was her real daughter, her flesh and blood. I was just the reminder of Dad's first marriage, the ghost of a woman who died too young and left too much love behind. A security guard made his rounds around 4, giving everyone the once-over but not bothering anyone who wasn't causing trouble. He paused when he got to me, taking in my age and my university bag. "You waiting for the morning bus?" he asked. Something like that. He studied my face for a moment, probably trying to figure out if I was a runaway or just someone having a rough night. "There's a women's shelter on Deansgate if you need somewhere safe to stay." "I'm fine, thanks." "All right then. You need anything, just give us a shout." The kindness in his voice almost broke me. Here was a complete stranger offering more help than my own family had. I thought about taking him up on it, but something stubborn inside me refused. I wasn't ready to admit I needed charity. Not yet. Dawn came slowly, gray and reluctant. People started appearing for the early buses, commuters heading to jobs that probably didn't appreciate them either. I felt invisible among them, like I was watching life happen from behind glass. My phone had enough charge for one call when I finally found a working outlet. I stared at the screen for a long time before dialing Dad's number. It went straight to voicemail, like it always did when he was traveling. "Hi Dad, it's me. Just wanted to let you know I'm staying with a friend for a few days. Everything's fine. Call me when you get this." I hung up before I could say anything else. Anything that might sound like begging. I had some pride left, even if I didn't have much else. 3 days of sleeping rough had left me feeling like a different person. I'd managed to shower at the university gym and wash my clothes in the laundromat on Oxford Road, but I still felt grimy, like the streets had gotten under my skin. I was sitting in the waiting room of the walk-in clinic in Ancoats, hoping to get checked for any infections from the blood exposure, when she walked in. She was maybe 40, dressed in a sharp navy suit that probably cost more than my monthly student loan. Everything about her screamed professional, from her perfectly styled blonde hair to her confident stride. She scanned the room like she was looking for someone specific, and when her eyes landed on me, she smiled. "Emma Richardson?" she asked, approaching my chair. I nodded, immediately suspicious. Nobody knew I was here. Nobody knew where I'd been for the past 3 days. "My name is Victoria Hayes. I work for someone who's been looking for you." She sat down beside me without invitation, her voice low and professional. "The man you helped on Tuesday, he's been asking to meet you." My stomach dropped. "Is he okay? I mean, did he survive?" "He's recovering well, thanks to you. Your quick thinking probably saved his life." She pulled out a business card and handed it to me. "He'd very much like to thank you in person, if you're willing." The card was thick, expensive paper. "Victoria Hayes, executive assistant. No company name, just a phone number and email address." "Who is he?" I asked. "Someone who values loyalty and courage. Someone who doesn't forget when people help him." She stood up, smoothing down her skirt. "There's a car outside if you'd like to come now. No pressure, of course, but he's quite eager to meet you." I looked around the waiting room at the other patients, most of them looking as rough as I felt. What did I have to lose? "Okay." The car was a black Mercedes with tinted windows, the kind you see politicians riding in. Victoria didn't say much during the drive, just made polite conversation about the weather and asked if I was comfortable. We drove through parts of Manchester I'd never seen, past expensive shops and restaurants, until we pulled up to a private hospital that looked more like a luxury hotel. Security guards in suits nodded to Victoria as we walked through corridors lined with actual artwork, not the usual NHS posters about hand-washing. Everything was quiet, pristine, like stepping into a different world entirely. The room we entered was more like a hotel suite than a hospital room. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city, and there were fresh flowers on every surface. And there, Propped up in what looked like the world's most comfortable hospital bed was the man I'd found bleeding in that alley. He looked completely different, clean and alive. His hair was silver gray, neatly combed, and his eyes were sharp and intelligent. Even in hospital pajamas, he had an air of authority that made the room feel smaller. "Miss Richardson," he said, his voice warm but commanding. "Please, sit down." I took the chair beside his bed, suddenly aware of how I must look compared to this place. "These people. I owe you my life," he continued. "Not many people would have stopped to help a stranger, especially in circumstances like those. Anyone would have done the same thing," I said, though I knew that wasn't true. He smiled, and it transformed his whole face. "No, they wouldn't. I've learned that the hard way over the years. Most people look the other way when trouble comes calling." He studied my face for a moment. "Victoria tells me you've been having some difficulties at home." I shot a look at Victoria, who was standing by the window with her hands folded. "How do you know about that?" "I make it my business to know about people who help me, and I always repay my debts." He reached for a tablet on his bedside table and handed it to me. "This is what the newspapers are saying about what happened." The headline made my blood run cold. "Local student saves tech mogul in shooting." There was a photo of me from my university ID, and another of the man in the bed, except the caption identified him as James Morrison, CEO of Morrison Industries. I'd heard of Morrison Industries. Everyone had. They owned half the tech companies in the UK, plus property developments, media outlets, investment firms. James Morrison was one of the richest men in the country. "You saved a very wealthy man, Emma," he said quietly. "That comes with certain responsibilities. For both of us." Dad came home 2 days early. I know because Victoria called to tell me he'd been trying to reach me, and that he'd spoken to Clarice. Apparently my stepmother had finally realized that kicking out the girl who saved James Morrison might not have been her smartest move. I was sitting in a cafe near the university when Dad walked in, looking older than I remembered. His hair had more gray in it, and there were new lines around his eyes. He'd been working too hard, traveling too much, trying to keep everyone happy and failing at all of it. "Emma." He sat down across from me, his voice heavy with exhaustion. "I'm so sorry." "For what?" "You weren't even there." "For not being there. For leaving you with Clarice when I knew things were getting difficult. For not answering my phone when you called." He rubbed his face with both hands. "I saw the news. What you did, helping that man. I'm proud of you. Clarice wasn't. Clarice was scared. The mortgage company has been threatening foreclosure. Sophie's been having problems at school, and I've been gone so much." He looked up at me with tired eyes. "That doesn't excuse what she said to you, but maybe it explains it. She called me selfish, Dad. She said I didn't belong in the family." His face went pale. "She told me she asked you to leave because you two had an argument. She didn't tell me what she said. Would it have mattered if she had?" He was quiet for a long moment, and I could see him wrestling with the answer. "I don't know," he said finally. "I wish I could tell you yes, but I honestly don't know anymore." At least he was being honest. I appreciated that, even if it hurt. "The thing is," he continued, "this Morrison business has changed everything. There are reporters calling the house. Clarice's phone hasn't stopped ringing. Everyone wants to know about the girl who saved James Morrison. I didn't know who he was when I helped him. I know that. You know that. But the rest of the world thinks you're some kind of hero, and Clarice realizes she made a mistake." He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "She wants you to come home. She's ready to apologize. What do you want, Dad?" "I want my family back together. I want things to go back to how they were before everything got so complicated. They can't, though. Can they?" He shook his head slowly. "No, I don't think they can." My phone buzzed with a text from Victoria. "Mr. Morrison would like to see you again when you're ready. There's something he'd like to discuss." Dad saw me reading it. "What does he want with you?" "I don't know yet. But he's offered to help me figure out what comes next." "And you trust him?" I thought about James Morrison lying in that hospital bed, about the way he'd looked at me when he said he always repaid his debts, about Victoria's quiet efficiency, and the way even the security guards treated them with respect. More than I trust Clarice right now. Dad flinched like I'd slapped him, but he didn't argue. "What about your studies?" Your future? What about them? I'm 20 years old, Dad. I can't keep living in a house where I'm not wanted, walking on eggshells, waiting for the next explosion. Clarisse does want you there. She's just not good at showing it. She's had plenty of chances to show it. She chose not to. We sat in silence for a while, watching people walk past the window. Normal people with normal problems, heading to normal jobs or normal homes where they belonged. There's something else, Dad said eventually. Clarisse has been getting calls from journalists. Some of them aren't very nice. They're asking about our family, about why you weren't living at home when this happened. What's she telling them? The truth, mostly. That you were staying with friends after a family disagreement. But they're digging, Emma. They want to know everything about you. About us. I felt a chill run down my spine. What kind of everything? Your mother. The accident. Why I remarried so quickly. Whether Clarisse treats you fairly. He looked embarrassed. One of them asked if there was abuse in the house. And what did you say? I said no, of course, but they don't believe me. They think there's a story there. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a number I didn't recognize. I let it go to voicemail, but it started ringing again immediately. You need to make a decision, Emma, Dad said. Either come home and face this as a family or what? Or accept that things have changed permanently. Accept that maybe you've outgrown us. The words hung in the air between us like a challenge. I looked at my father, this man who'd tried so hard to build a new life after losing my mother, and realized that maybe we'd both been pretending for too long that it was working. The apartment James Morrison arranged for me was nothing fancy, just a one-bedroom flat in Chorlton with decent furniture and a view of the park. But it was mine. No one could kick me out of it. No one could make me feel unwelcome in my own space. That feeling was worth more than all the luxury in the world. The job came with it, of course. Assistant coordinator for the Morrison Foundation's emergency response program. It sounded impressive on paper, but really I was just helping organize first aid training sessions and coordinating with local hospitals about trauma response. The kind of work that mattered but didn't make headlines. James had been honest about his expectations from the start. I'm not offering you charity, he'd said during our second meeting. I'm offering you an opportunity to do something meaningful with what happened to us both. But you'll earn every penny, and if you don't work out, you'll be gone within a month. I'd lasted 6 months so far. The work wasn't easy, but it felt important in a way that my university courses never had. I was helping train people to save lives, to be ready when chaos struck. Every time I taught someone how to apply pressure to a wound or recognize the signs of shock, I thought about that alley, about those few minutes when I'd made a difference. Dad visited sometimes. We'd have coffee and talk about safe topics like the weather or my work. He never asked me to come home anymore, and I never asked about Clarisse. It was better that way, easier for both of us. Sophie was different, though. She'd started texting me after she got her first phone, sending me photos of her school projects and asking about my job. She was 15 now, old enough to understand that families were complicated, that sometimes people had to make difficult choices. Mum says you're doing important work, she'd written in her last message. She watches the news stories about your foundation. I'd stared at that text for a long time before responding. How is she? Sad, mostly. Dad's been working from home more, but it's not the same. The house feels too quiet. Part of me felt guilty about that. Part of me wondered if I should have tried harder to forgive Clarisse, to rebuild what we'd had. But then, I remembered her voice that night. The venom in her words. The way she'd looked at me like I was something dirty she needed to sweep out of her house. The doorbell rang, interrupting my thoughts. I wasn't expecting anyone. But when I opened the door, Victoria was standing there with her usual professional smile and a bottle of wine. I hope you don't mind the impromptu visit, she said. James thought you might want to hear about the latest development. I let her in, curious despite myself. Victoria had become something like a friend over the past few months, though I was never quite sure if her friendliness was genuine or part of her job description. The police caught the people who shot him, she said, settling into my small sofa. 3 men, hired by a business rival who thought removing James would give him an advantage in some property deal. That's good news, isn't it? Very good. It means the threat is over. James can stop looking over his shoulder, and you can stop worrying that someone might come after you for being a witness. I hadn't realized I'd been worrying about that until she said it, but she was right. There'd been a tension in the back of my mind for months, a feeling that I was still connected to that violence in ways I didn't understand. There's something else, Victoria continued. James wants to expand the foundation, open a new branch focused on youth programs, teaching teenagers emergency response skills. He'd like you to head it up. Me? I'm barely qualified for the job I have now. You're more qualified than you think. And you understand what it means to help strangers, to put yourself at risk for people you don't know. That's not something you can teach in a classroom. I thought about it while Victoria opened the wine. A year ago, I'd been a university student living in my stepmother's house, walking on eggshells and trying to make myself small enough to avoid conflict. Now I was being offered the chance to run my own program, to make real decisions about how to help people. What would happen to my current job? You'd keep doing it, just with more responsibility. And more pay, obviously. How much more? Victoria named a figure that made me nearly choke on my wine. It was more money than Dad made, more than Clarice had ever dreamed of having. Why? I asked. Why is he doing all this for me? Victoria was quiet for a moment, swirling the wine in her glass. James Morrison is a complicated man, she said finally. He's made a lot of enemies over the years, stepped on a lot of people to get where he is. I think what you did reminded him that there are still good people in the world, people who help without expecting anything in return. But he's giving me plenty in return. That's different. That's gratitude, not payment. She looked at me seriously. He sees something in you, Emma, something worth investing in. The question is, do you see it too? I looked around my small flat, at the life I'd built from nothing, at the work I'd learned to do well. 6 months ago, I'd been homeless and heartbroken. Now I had choices, real ones, and the power to make them for myself. Tell him yes, I said.